All right, hello, wine drinking people. We are back, and it's time for what I had to drink yesterday. And man, we had a busy weekend this weekend. Not only did we have an incredible tasting here in the store on Friday night, our annual California Cult tasting, somebody invited me to dinner Saturday night. And you know how to get me to your house for dinner. Just tell me you're serving like 82 Leoville Las Casas, 81 Le Mission Aubryon, and 83 Yquem for dessert. I'm there, baby. All right, well, let's talk about what we had at our cult tasting. This is an annual event, and this is one of the funnest events we do all year. Usually we do it blind, and this year we probably should have, But we had some great wines, of course, the best of the best, coming from California, the elite, most expensive wines, like Screaming Eagle, which is upwards of $2,000 a bottle now for an older vintage, like this 1999. So pretty much we had a flight of 2004s, a flight of 99s, and then a lonely 95 and a lonely 98. Just to give you a little perspective on how California wines age. Well, we started with two of the great white wines of California. You can't see them because they're buried behind all this Cabernet. Marcusson Chardonnay, 2002 Sonoma Coast, and Kistler, 2002 Kistler Vineyard. And, most people at this tasting probably had not had the Marcusson before, which is Helen Turley's home vineyard out there on the Sonoma Coast. First vintage was 1996. So these are still relatively young vines, only the sixth vintage from this vineyard. A lot of people don't feel you can make great wines until the vines get to be, in the 20, 25-year-old range. So I can't wait to taste this Marcusson wine when it gets to be that age. But for me, the Kistler kind of won that night. Both of these wines had lovely concentration and depth. The Marcusson had this lovely movie popcorn butter nose and almost a sweetness to the fruit that would lead you to believe there's residual in this. But man, the wine just had so many layers of spice and fruit and minerality coming through on the finish, and a little hotter in the alcohol range too than the Kistler. And for me, the Kistler wine just had a little better balance, a little better freshness and acidity coming through at the end, but both wines stunning examples of California Chardonnay. All right, well, our first flight was 2004 vintage wines, and the winner for me in this flight was the Arajo. I mean, it really did have the most complex nose of all of them, in addition to having that lovely cassis and currant berry fruit that you get out of California Cabernets. It had this fine herb, it had this minerality, it had this dark chocolate note, really intense and layered on the finish too. These 04 still very young. The Bond wine showed a little bit tannic. The Colgan showed a little hint of that green tea. That wine, to me is so typical about that wine from up in Pritchard Hill. And the Bryant family, maybe also still showing a little bit young, but pretty impressive. So the first flight for me went to the Arajo, and the Schaefer would probably be next. The Schaefer Hillside Select, just showing wonderful balance, wonderful concentration. One of the things that can happen with California wines with so much alcohol, they can become a little bit hot in the finish, a little bit out of balance. But I thought all these wines showed wonderful balance. All right, next up, the flight of 1999 vintage wines. And, one of the reasons I do this tasting blind is because everyone wants to pick the Screaming Eagle as their favorite wine because, it's such a cool name, man, right? Screaming Eagle? Well, one of the reasons why it's become so expensive, not only the cool name, limited production. Some vintages, they make under 200 cases of Screaming Eagle. 1999 was a pretty tannic vintage. These wines were a little rough around the edges when they first came out, and so was the Screaming Eagle. When I first smelled it, I thought maybe it had a little VA on the nose, a little nail polish hint maybe, but that blew off. And this wine had this lovely kind of black earth and dark cocoa and rich concentrated fruit, lovely velvety tannins. That's one of the things that you get from the Oakville appellation, really smooth and decadent tannins. Surprise, Arajo, again, one of the best wines in this flight, 1999. This Isley Vineyard up near Calistoga on the Silverado Trail, one of the really special vineyards in Napa Valley. Phelps made incredible wines from this vineyard up until 1990 when Barton Daphne bought it. But an incredible wine, both of these Arajos. If I had to pick a winner between the two, and saying which one, showed the best, because we had two vintages of each wine except for the Harlan and the Screaming Eagle, it would probably be Arajo. But my favorite wine of the day, the 1999 Harlan. Wow, boom, pow. This wine was all that and a box of chocolates, also from Oakville. But 99 Harlan, one of the lowest rated of all the Harlans. This wine had lovely concentration, lovely balance, and a long, long finish. Just seemed to go on and on and on. Absolutely fantastic stuff. And, once again, the Bond showed a little bit tannic in this flight. And the second vintage of Bryant family, we had to go back to the 95 vintage, which was a great vintage in Napa Valley. And this Bryant showed very well also. The 95 Bryant, one of the wines of the night in my opinion. Drinking at or near its peak. Had a lovely softness and velvetyness to the tannins. And still lovely fruit and still pronounced acidity in this wine. And hey, the 85 Schaefer, man, for the old dog, this wine really showed up. And, the 85 vintage was a great vintage in Napa, but there's not many wines from 85 that are still hanging in there as good as this Hillside is. One of the great vineyards of the Stags Leap District. Schaefer started their reserve program in 82. Well, that was the only year they called it reserve. And then 83, they called it Hillside Select. And basically their reserve Cabernet Sauvignon from the Sunspot Vineyard, and a fabulous wine holding together brilliantly still, even at, 26, 27 years of age. Beautiful stuff. All right, well, that's what we had to drink at the Cult Tasting, folks. I'm your host, Andrew Lampasoni. Next, we've got our tasting at the Adelsons on Saturday night.